you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Deku Finds Powerpuff Girls in MHA. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of PeriwinkleFrog on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Come on, Bubbles. Come at me, Blossom shouted. Bubbles looked uneasy as she stood still, jumping a little in place. She, along with her sisters, were in an empty arena. They were in Gym Gamma, a gym facility on US school grounds. They were allowed temporary access to it so that they had a place to train. After all, the girls were going to need it. The entrance exam was tomorrow. Blossom was in the middle of the gym, tense and ready to battle. In her hand was her signature hyper yo-yo, which was spinning as she threw it down beside her and pulled it up again effortlessly. Buttercup, meanwhile, was leaning on the wall, watching her two sisters stand off with boredom on her face. It was a one-on-one mock battle between Bubbles and Blossom, so she wasn't allowed to fight this time. So far, neither of them had moved since the battle started. Way to kick ass, guys! Buttercup called to them, sarcasm heavy in her tone. Bubbles shushed her. Please and kindly shut up. I'm trying to think of a strategy. Suddenly, a red blur whizzed past Bubbles' vision as the yo-yo came hurling towards her. With a gasp, she quickly sprang up as the yo-yo hit the ground where she once stood, cracking the concrete. Blossom started to run as she called up the yo-yo and sprang up into the air as well, floating to the same level as Bubbles. The more you think of strategies, the more you hesitate, Blossom warned as she threw the yo-yo again at Bubbles. Quickly, Bubbles' eyes started to glow red, and she shot laser beams out of her eyes, which deflected the yo-yo mid-course. With the attack now useless, Bubbles blasted towards Blossom, aiming a kick at her head. But even with one hand calling back the yo-yo, Blossom deflected the attack by knocking Bubbles' foot down with one hand. After that, it was a blur of pink and blue as the two girls clashed, using their powers to try and get a jump on one another. As Blossom managed to force Bubbles out of the sky with an energy-fueled punch, Bubbles activated her force field bubble before crashing into the ground. After she deactivated her force field, Bubbles charged at Blossom, who just landed, and engaged her in hand-to-hand combat, all of their attacks fueled by their signature-colored energy. Eventually, Blossom threw a kick, to which Bubbles immediately brought her arms up over her face to block. While she took the hit, Bubbles skidded back a considerable distance, allowing Blossom the opportunity to regenerate her yo-yo again and throw it at her. Almost immediately, the yo-yo wrapped around Bubbles, the string trapping her and binding her limbs to her body. Finally, Blossom grabbed the string and swung it around, taking Bubbles with her. After a few spins, Blossom put the string over her head, jumped up, and yanked the string to her front. This caused her to bring Bubbles flying into the air before smashing her into the ground. Even though the impact created a comically large crater in the concrete, Bubbles stood up while rubbing her head, as if she simply bumped her head. Okay, I surrender. Bubbles sighed, rather annoyed. Buttercup pushed herself off the wall and walked to her sisters while slowly clapping. What a terribly boring battle that was, Buttercup said bluntly, before lighting up and shouting, "Now, it's my turn." As Buttercup said this, Blossom tossed the yo-yo up into the air, which exploded in a mini, glittery pink firework explosion. She then turned to Buttercup with a deadpan expression. "Buttercup, you fought like 5 times already." Blossom sighed. Bubbles pouted, still rubbing her head. "And beat us both." Buttercup grinned. "You know what they say. There can be no such thing as too much training." Blossom rolled her eyes. "No one says that. By that logic, everyone says there can be no such thing as too many stretches, which is what we're doing now." Even though both Bubbles and Buttercup groaned they hate stretches, they obeyed as they and Blossom did some light stretching. As they did, they stretched in silence for a few minutes before Bubbles broke the silence. 10 months, can't believe it's been that long, Bubbles sighed. Buttercup shrugged as she did some arm stretches. It's been horrible, but we did it. At least things will be interesting for the remainder of however long we stay here. Bubbles looked sad as she stretched her legs. But how long will that even be? It won't be long, Bubbles. I bet the scientists are closer than ever to getting a breakthrough, Blossom said cheerily. For a few more moments, the girls stretched in silence. But just as they finished them, Blossom and Buttercup heard sniffling. It was coming from Bubbles as she was starting to cry. Bubbles, what's the matter? Blossom asked, alarmed. Yeah, is something wrong? Or is it someone? Do I gotta beat somebody up? Buttercup added, flaring up at the last sentence. Bubbles shook her head as more tears streamed down her face. I just feel guilty, she said softly. Before they knew it, the girls were sitting on the floor. Blossom and Buttercup shared a confused and concerned glance before looking at Bubbles. What do you mean you feel guilty? Buttercup asked more softly. Bubbles sniffed as she wiped her face, new tears replacing the ones she tried to wipe away. We've been gone. For almost a year. We haven't been to Townsville since. We haven't been protecting Townsville ever since. What if villains are already overrunning it? What if they destroyed Townsville by now? We vanished in Townsville's time of need, and they're paying the price for it. And it's our fault. Bubbles seemed like she wanted to say more, but her crying had become too strong for her to utter another word. As she broke down into tears, Blossom and Buttercup looked down, having no way to comfort her, because they thought of the same things. Townsville wasn't the type of city to hold its own against villains by themselves. That was the main reason why the girls were heroes in the first place. So it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that Townsville was being attacked the longer the girls stayed in this world. But it was hard to think about. It was hard to even consider what is happening in Townsville right now. And the feeling of knowing that was sickening. Slowly, Blossom pulled Bubbles into a hug, tears filling her own eyes. We don't know that for sure, she whispered. Who really knows what's happening in Townsville? Maybe time never passed there. Maybe the villains never even noticed we went missing. Bubbles sniffed, but stopped crying a little less. Even with that in mind, it doesn't make me feel better. Just makes me feel forgotten. Buttercup slid to sit on the other side of Bubbles. Look, we don't know at all what's going on outside this reality. So, the best thing we should do is not focus on it. Both Bubbles and Blossom gave her bewildered looks, which prompted Buttercup to glare. I'm serious. So what if Townsville's being attacked? It won't last, that's for sure. Those wannabe lamios can cause as much chaos as they want. But I know that as soon as we get back, we'd beat their asses so bad, they'll take off running. They'll be out of Townsville's hair so fast, you won't be able to tell if they were there at all. Now, Buttercup was really into her speech as she stood up and placed herself in front of Bubbles and Blossom. And I know that Townsville can stay safe until that day. You gotta give them more credit. Imagine it. Right now, they're hiding in bunkers and whatnot, knowing and hoping that we'll come back soon to give those villains hell. They're counting on us to get stronger until then. But we can't keep doing that if we're sobbing like babies. Until those science dudes get the portal up and running and step up their game, we have to step up our game too. Because as soon as we get the chance, we're busting out of here and we're gonna be on their asses. As Bubbles and Blossom stared at her, they were shocked. I never thought of it that way, Blossom admitted. Me neither, Bubbles added. Buttercup nodded, while rolling her eyes. No shit, Sherlocks, I'm the smartest of the group after all. As Blossom and Bubbles stood up, the former scoffed. Okay, you're pushing your smart statements. But you're right, we need to be prepared and be even stronger. We're gonna have to do our best to pass the entrance exam. Slowly, Buttercup and Blossom looked at Bubbles anticipatingly. While Bubbles looked nervous for a second, she then glared in determination, wiped her face one last time, and grinned as she curled her hands into fists. You're right, let's do this, for Townsville. Together, the girls put their hands in the middle, and after 3 brief seconds, threw their hands up into the air. For Townsville. Today was the day. The long-awaited practical portion of the entrance exam. This wasn't a big deal for nothing. Yuwa High, as the girls learned, was the top hero academy in all of Japan. That was probably why people of all kinds were flocking to the tall glass building, determined to get into Yuwa. Slowly, The girls stepped onto the sidewalk leading up to Yua. It all felt unreal. If none of this ever happened, then Blossom guessed that her and her sisters would be flying through the city in their colorful dresses, ready to fight crime. And now, here they were, in casual clothes, ready to take a test to get into a school that will allow them to fight crime after they graduate. As they stood under the harsh glare of the sunlight, Buttercup grinned and did a fist pump in the air. "Yeah, let's go kick some ass." As she said that, Buttercup started to sprint towards the building. But almost immediately, Blossom grabbed the back of Buttercup's shirt, keeping her in place. "Slow your roll, Spice," Blossom said calmly as she let go, causing Buttercup to stumble and almost fall on her face. "We need to think of a plan first before we do anything." Buttercup glared at Blossom as she fixed the cap on her head. "It's always plan with you. Would it kill you to just not think for once and go pow, pow, pow?" Bubbles looked at Blossom with confusion. "Plus, how can we plan? We have no idea what Yua has for the entrance exam." Blossom crossed her arms. "Which is why we need to think of as many plans and strategies as we can, so that we're prepared for anything. This isn't a spontaneous monster fight. This is a complex and carefully executed exam that some of the brightest heroes in this universe came up with." Buttercup waved a hand dismissively, while interrupting Blossom. Yeah, I have a suggestion. Why don't we just, I don't know, kick ass and win?" Before both Bubbles or Blossom could offer a rebuttal, Buttercup started to walk away with her hands crossed behind her head, while glancing back at them. "You guys worry too much for your own goods. You can go ahead and do that. Meanwhile, am gonna have some fun when I'm here." Suddenly, Buttercup ran into someone in front of her, who had their back turned. Quickly, Buttercup jumped back while rubbing her face and widening her eyes. "Sorry, man. I wasn't paying attention to." Buttercup found herself trailing off when the guy turned around to face her. Red and angry eyes, messy blonde hair, face twisted into a bewildered scowl. The girls haven't seen this guy since that day 10 months ago. But now, he was standing here and glaring down at them. "What the hell are you doing here?" Buttercup yelled. Bakugou was surprised for a moment, but that moment quickly ended as his eye twitched. "Not you fucking tiny tots here again. Where are your parents?" Buttercup growled as she looked like she was growing angrier and angrier. But then, she sighed and closed her eyes. "Okay. This is good. You know what? It's good that you're here." Bakugou and the girls stared at Buttercup with bewilderment. Suddenly, Buttercup's eyes flashed open as she looked angrier than before. "So that I can kick the shit out of you." After she said that, Buttercup started to lunge at Bakugou. Quickly, Blossom and Bubbles grabbed her and restrained her as she thrashed around. "Can we please go through one interaction without you trying to punch a person's face in?" Blossom groaned to Buttercup. "We aren't being good examples of potential UA students, Buttercup," Bubbles squeaked. As this went on, Bakugou seemed to not care, as he simply scoffed and walked away. As he did, Buttercup slowly stopped moving and stared in confusion as he walked away. "Did that son of a bitch just walk away?" Buttercup asked, blinking in indignation. As Blossom and Bubbles let go, Blossom hit Buttercup on the back of the head, prompting her to yelp and cover the back of her head immediately with her hand. "Yes, he's focused on the UA entrance exam, which is what we're supposed to be doing," Blossom scolded. Buttercup sighed. "I really hate it here, you know." With that, the three girls walked towards the entrance and went inside the building. Inside the lobby, there were signs that pointed towards the auditorium, where the debrief on the rules of the exam was taking place. As the girls joined the crowd of teens heading towards there, Blossom turned to her sisters. "Okay, remember what Mr. Aizawa told us?" she asked. Buttercup groaned. "Yes, we went over this at least like 400 times already. When we're here in this reality, we go under fake names." Bubbles frowned a little. "I still don't know why we gotta do that." "A week ago." "Wait, we have to do what?" Buttercup asked, shocked. In the girls' apartment, the three were sitting on a couch. On the opposite side of them was Aizawa, as he repeated what he said before for a second time. "During your time in Musutafu, you go under fake names." Blossom looked as equally shocked as Buttercup. "We know what you said. But why? Why can't we just keep our names? Aizawa sighed. I'm not saying that you have to change your names permanently. You're still Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. But to the Misutafu government and everyone else but me and Nizu, you will be known by fake names. It's a safety precaution. Safety precaution for what? Buttercup asked, still frustrated. Just imagine, girls. So far, you are foreign and undocumented children. People have enough questions about your presence. So, you must have a fake record of information, so that nobody suspects that you're not from this world. But, can't we just tell everyone what we told you and Mr. Nizu? Bubbles asked. Aizawa shook his head. There are two problems with that. 1. Not many people will believe you. 2. If they do believe you, that will be worse. There are bad people here, people that will want to know more about how and why you came here, along with what exactly you are. And they will do bad things to get that information. You can only tell the truth to people you can trust. Otherwise, everything personal stays hidden. Bubbles looked sad. So, we're no longer Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup? Aizawa thought for a moment before saying, not necessarily. You can still have those names as pro-hero names. Plus, only your classmates and adults will be calling you by your fake names. But it's important that nobody knows you by your real name. Got it? The girls hesitated before nodding slowly, looking disappointed. Got it, they said in unison. Present day. Soon, the girls were in the auditorium. At the entrance, there were cards with people's names on it. The girls were supposed to grab the card with their fake name on it. What's our fake name, again? Bubbles asked a little too loudly. Quickly, Blossom shushed her, looked around so that no one was looking at them, and lowered her voice. I'm Momoko, you're Miyako, and Buttercup's Kaoru. Blossom whispered. Buttercup grumbled as she picked up her card. How come you both have names that start with M, but I just have Kaoru? At least our real names all started with the same letter. Blossom shrugged as she and Bubbles picked up their cards. I didn't come up with the names, Blossom said matter-of-factly. As soon as they took their cards, the girls made their way to their assigned seats and sat down. As they did, Bubbles looked around at the full auditorium. There sure are a lot of people. Are you sure that we can get into Class 1? Class 1A, Blossom corrected, and yes, we've trained all these months for this. We're prepared. After she said that, though, Blossom leaned back into her chair, looking worried. At least, I hope so. Soon enough, everyone was seated and the lights above the stage lit up, signaling the start of the ceremony. Just then, a person strutted on stage. He looked like he had jumped straight out of a comic book, with his overly slicked-up hair and DJ outfit. Then again, the girls were more or less in a comic book-esque world. Just then, music from an unseen speaker blared, startling everybody except for the guy on stage, who shouted in an inhumanly loud voice. Ah yeah, who's ready to rock this exam? As Bubbles covered her ears, she looked at her sisters, bewildered. No one told me this was a death metal concert, Bubbles yelled, trying to make herself heard over the deafening music. Soon, the music stopped, prompting everyone to slowly uncover their ears. But then, they covered their ears right back up again as the guy shouted. Welcome, y'all, name's Present Mike, your announcer for this practical exam. Are we ready to rumble? After he said that, Present Mike leaned forward, obviously expecting the crowd to shout back. But the silence present seemed to be even louder than Present Mike's yells, as no one made a sound. The more that the silence stayed, the more Present Mike looked disappointed. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a person suddenly clapping. It was Buttercup as she was enthusiastically clapping and cheering. Woo! Yeah, Buttercup cheered. Due to the growing attention on them, Blossom quickly signaled to Buttercup to quit it, to which she did after a few seconds. As she sat down, Bubbles looked at her curiously while Blossom glared at her. What? It was good music, Buttercup protested. On stage, Present Mike smiled, looking both grateful at the fact that Buttercup cheered and awkward at the fact that only Buttercup cheered. Much thanks, little girl, and as for the rest of you, who knows, maybe you're saving your hype for the practical exam. Speaking of the practical. At his words, the wall behind him lit up, showing a slideshow presentation. The title said, U.S. Rockin' Robot Rumble. I'm here to tell y'all how this is gonna go, Present Mike declared. After he said that, the slide switched to a slide with rules on it. Now, if you were to look at the title, you might conclude that this practical's gonna be about robots. And you are absolutely correct. That's right. This isn't a free-for-all battle to the death. Nope, it's a free-for-all battle to the death against robots. At this, the girls blinked, confused. Wait, they have robots here? Bubbles asked timidly. How futuristic is this place? Buttercup added with wide eyes. Before the girls could mumble to each other more, Present Mike continued. Now, the rules are simple. There are 4 kinds of bots, or villains, situated across a mock battle site of a city. What you gotta do is use your quirks to decimate as many as you can. The number of points you get is based on the type of robot you destroy, as you can see here. As soon as Present Mike said the last word, the slide switched to one that had 4 silhouettes of robots, with one number listed above each silhouette, each one of them different. One had a 1, one had a 2, one had a 3, and one had a 0. As the girls looked at the slide, Blossom especially noticed the 0, which confused her. Why was there a 0 above one of them? Was it worth no points? If it was worth points, what's its actual point value? If it wasn't worth points, then why is it included in the first place? And apparently, Blossom wasn't the only one to wonder about it, as she and her sisters suddenly heard mumbling. So, this is a earn points by destroying type of thing. Interesting. I'm guessing that the number of points means the difficulty of the robot, meaning that the one with 1 point is the easiest, while the 4th is hardest. Maybe I could. Soon, almost everyone in the surrounding area was looking around, confused. The girls looked around too, until Blossom spotted the person who was mumbling. A boy, with green hair and eyes, as well as freckles. He seemed to intend to just speak to himself, but he didn't notice that he was speaking so loud that people could hear him. Soon, Bubbles spotted him too. Oh, it's that boy, from the monster attack. What's his name, again? Dee? Danny? Deku? Blossom replied, still staring at him. Oh yeah, Buttercup exclaimed in realization, the one with the weird name. Just then, someone raised their hand high up over the crowd, drawing everyone's attention, including Present Mike as he pointed to the hand. You sir, in the back, have a question? Present Mike asked. After the hand came down, the owner stood up for everybody to see him. It was a tall boy, with black hair and glasses. He looked kind of strange to the girls, due to the fact that he was moving so stiffly, even as he bowed momentarily. Thank you, sir. I have 2 things to address. Firstly. Just then, the boy pointed to where the girls were, which made all 3 of them freeze. Is this guy pointing at us? Buttercup asked, bewildered. Oh no, did we get caught? Bubbles whimpered. But after a moment, the girls realized that the guy wasn't pointing at them, and was pointing at Deku instead, which made him look up with confusion. This question is directed to you. Yes, you. Gentleman with the unnatural green hair and freckles. Why are you mumbling incoherently? You are distracting the people around you. If you are to only distract others and not take this seriously, then I suggest you leave. Immediately, Deku looked panicked as he yelped. Oh, no, I wasn't trying to distract anybody. I'm sorry if I disturbed you. Everyone who was looking at him looked at him for a few more seconds before turning to face the front. It was as if the crowd didn't really care all that much about his apology. Meanwhile, the girls were surprised, mainly at the boy who called out Deku's mumblings. Was that really necessary? To ask a person to leave because he was mumbling too loud? Buttercup said, as she raised an eyebrow. I guess that guy's really strict. Like Blossom. Bubbles added, being blunt without meaning to. Blossom prickled as she frowned. Excuse you, I am not that bossy. Before the girls could continue talking among themselves, the guy was asking his second question. And regarding the battle rules, there's a 0 above one of the villain robots. Why is that? Present Mike smiled. I'm glad you asked. That's exactly what I was going to tell you next. After he said that, the slide switched to show a video game animation of a person defeating robots. As you probably concluded by now, the amount of points a robot has determines the difficulty of the robot's fighting style. The one with 1 point is the easiest, while the one with 3 points is the hardest. As for the 0-pointer robot, this is simply an arena trap. What's an arena trap, you might ask? Why? Its purpose is basically what it's named after. An arena trap weeds out contenders and tries to prevent others from freely beating robots up. And, between you and me, I would avoid these guys. Not only are they worth absolutely no points, but they're pretty big, so even if you were able to strike down the mechanical hunk, you'd receive no points for it. Buttercup scoffed. That sounds stupid. Why even include a big robot like that if it ain't worth any points? Blossom shrugged. US very strange when it comes to organizing exams, probably. All right, Present Mike exclaimed, not hearing any of the girls' complaints. Any more questions? When no one raised their hand, Present Mike clapped his hands together. Awesome. Now, if you are to take a quick peek at the card you grabbed on your way in here, you can see your assigned test site. That's right. This whole auditorium's gonna be sent to different test sites. They all look the same, of course, a replica of a city. But you are going to be with different people you don't know. And don't try counting on your buddies to help you with the practical. Everyone who went to the same middle school has been sent to different locations to prevent cheaters. Bubbles froze at that. Does that mean we'll be separated? Blossom glanced at her sister's card as well as her own. All of them had the same test site. I guess not. We'll still be together. But we're scoring points individually, not as a team. Buttercup grinned. PSSH, I can handle that. I'm gonna be the best fighter at our test site. Just then, Present Mike yelled, so what are y'all waiting for? Head on out so that you catch the bus to your test site. Let's do this thing. And with that, the slideshow turned off, and all of the lights came back on. Simultaneously, everyone got up, including the girls. This is it, I guess, Blossom sighed. Bubbles gulped. I'm kind of nervous. Buttercup hit her lightly on the arm. Don't be, Bubs. We'll be fine. We trained for this. Quickly, the girls rushed to move in the surging crowd heading outside the auditorium. Soon, they were able to go outside and get on their assigned bus, where they all sat next to each other. And then, finally, they were off, and the bus drove them to the test site. Blossom leaned against the window and stared outside as the bus moved. She shared Bubbles' feelings. But she was more than nervous. She was also scared. Scared that she and her sisters might fail the practical and go back to Musatafu with no chance of getting into UA. Mostly, she was scared of the possibility that this path that they're taking won't ever lead to a chance of going home. Blossom didn't ever want to consider such a thing. But she couldn't help it. There was a bigger chance than she thought of her and her sisters not getting home. For all she knew, this could be the girls' life from now on. Even if they were to get into UA and graduate, the girls would just become heroes with limited privileges and costly fame. Blossom didn't want that, and she knew that her sisters didn't either. Soon, Blossom's thoughts were interrupted as the bus pulled into the destination, and she sighed. She hoped that the trip was longer. But now, the bus was parked, and everyone was getting off. After leaving the bus, Blossom and her sisters stepped out into the sunlight, only to stop and stare in awe at the test site in front of them. Present Mike wasn't kidding. The site looked identical to an actual city, with towering buildings and winding streets and sidewalks. In a way, the city looked familiar, like the city that the girls unwillingly left all those months ago. Around the girls, people were preparing by doing warm-up stretches. As they walked farther into the crowd, the girls got ready too. Okay, you guys know what to do. Destroy as many robot villains as we can. It's important to destroy the ones with higher points. Also, avoid arena traps. Blossom warned her sisters. Buttercup rolled her eyes. Yeah, I think we all heard Present Mike back at the auditorium. Just then, laughing caught the girls' attention, and they turned around. A mini crowd was forming around someone, as people teased and laughed. As the girls got closer, the person they were crowded around was Deku, as he looked nervous and intimidated, as people teased him. Izukumidoriya, why are you here? Yeah, aren't you quirkless? You can't even bother to win the practical if all you can do is study. Hey, at least we have less competition to worry about. As people laughed more, they started to walk away, giggling and whispering as they left Deku, or Izuku as people called him, standing there, looking sad. As people went around the girls, Buttercup glared. Man, what is with the people being such huge pricks in this world? Yeah, people are so mean, Bubbles sighed. Blossom looked to be deep in thought as she frowned. They called him quirkless. I wonder what that even is. Just then, Present Mike's voice spoke through a nearby intercom, startling everybody. Everyone, what are y'all doing? Just standing here? Waiting for a countdown? Well, news flash, life doesn't have countdowns. Get a move on unless you want to end up with no points. Go, go, go. Immediately, everyone started to run into the city, harried. Buttercup snickered as she pushed off the ground and floated in midair. Why run when you can fly? Buttercup said snidely. With that, she blasted away, leaving a green trail behind her. Bubbles gasped. Hey, wait for me, she shouted after Buttercup. As she said that, Bubbles pushed off the ground and flew after Buttercup, prompting Blossom to fly up and follow them. The girls jetted through the streets, separating to go and find their own robots to destroy. Buttercup turned down a corner, her eyes narrowed and searching places as she flew by. Now, where are you, you robot bastards? Buttercup mused to herself. Suddenly, something jumped out into Buttercup's way, which prompted her to skid to a stop. Buttercup then found herself looking up at a robot, who loomed over her and seemed to be at least 5 feet taller. While she was stunned for a second, Buttercup found herself to be underwhelmed as she chuckled. That's it. I fought scarier villains in Townsville. Just then, the robot suddenly moved as it threw a punch at Buttercup. Although she was surprised by the sudden attack, Buttercup caught the punch, holding the robot's arm inches away from her face. As she stared at the fist, Buttercup dug into the metal, leaving noticeable dents as she looked furiously at the robot. You beach? Then, with a war yell, Buttercup swung the villain around with ease and slammed the bot into the ground. Before the robot could recover, Buttercup was on top of it and decimated it in 3 punches. Just as she finished caving the robot's head in, more bots emerged from alleys, their attention on her. Buttercup turned around to look at them, before grinning and moving her cap so that it faced backwards. All right, you dickwads. You're in for a beating. Meanwhile, Bubbles wandered around, skipping on the sidewalk. Around her, she could see various people destroying robots. She watched them as she skipped, admiring their skills and quirks. Wow, those guys are really good, Bubbles remarked. Just then, a 2-pointer robot popped up in front of her, aiming its barbed tail at her face. Quickly, Bubbles did a backflip, dodging the jab. When she recovered, she looked up, wide-eyed, as the robot pulled back its tail. Don't worry, Mr. Robot, don't try and attack me, 'cause I'm not here to hurt you. I'll just be immobilizing you, Bubbles said, greeting the robot as if it was a normal person. Of course, the robot didn't understand or hear any of what Bubbles said and attacked again, jabbing its tail at Bubbles. Easily, Bubbles caught and held onto the tail, yanking it forward after she had a tight hold on it. As the robot slipped and fell, Bubbles put a foot down firmly on its chest and looked down at the robot with curiosity. Now, where are your rainbow wires so that I can yank them out? Bubbles mused, mostly to herself. Despite being pinned to the ground, the robot shot a laser beam out of its face, which almost got Bubbles as she rolled off the robot. After she did, the robot wasted no time as it got up and lunged at her. As it did, Bubbles sighed. Guess we do this the hard way. As the robot got close, Bubbles grabbed its tail, yanking it close enough for her to land a powerful kick on its face. This sent the robot flying into a building, destroyed by both Bubbles' kick and the impact. Bubbles then resumed her route as if nothing happened. In another part of the site, Blossom was busy taking on a couple of 3-pointers. As the robots shot missiles at her, Blossom dodged them easily. She then sprang to one and grabbed onto it, pink electricity swarming her hands. The electricity caused the bot to short-circuit. 4, she shouted as it was destroyed. She quickly pushed off the bot's destroyed body towards another one, flipped in the air, and pushed her heel forcefully into the top of the bot's head, resulting in the bot getting crushed into a flat piece of metal. 8. After Blossom said that, 4 robots sprang at her from all directions. But Blossom didn't bat an eye at this as she rapidly spun around. As she spun, her eyes glowed red and laser beams blasted out of them. This resulted in laser beams going everywhere, puncturing every robot in Blossom's surrounding area. Once every robot fell down, Blossom stopped spinning, panting a little. 24. Blossom whispered as she ran off. As she ran around, looking for more robots, something suddenly rammed into her side, making Blossom move a few inches to the side. She jumped to the side and turned around, expecting a robot. But what she was Buttercup, looking dirty and pissed. 2 robots emerged into the alley, presumably the ones that blasted Buttercup out of the alley. Blossom looked at her sister, worried. Need some help? But Buttercup simply took off her cap and pushed it into Blossom's hands. They're mine, Buttercup growled in a dark voice. Before Blossom could say anything, Buttercup jetted towards the robots like a green bullet, grabbed the robots' heads, and rammed them into each other, blasting them into pieces. Soon, Buttercup came back, looking much more composed and holding pieces of metal and wires in both of her hands. Nonchalantly, Buttercup dropped the metal in her hands and took the cap back calmly. Thanks, Buttercup simply said as she put her cap back on. Blossom, for a moment, looked like she wanted to address what just happened, but in the end, decided not to. Have you seen Bubbles around? Blossom asked. Before Buttercup replied, a blue blur flashed in both of their visions before Bubbles was in front of them, smiling. I destroyed my 47th robot. To show them proof, Bubbles tossed something in her hands down on the ground, which looked at first to be a spiky green ball, but was actually a crumpled-up robot. Blossom nodded slowly as she looked at the robot remains nervously. Okay, I guess it's safe to say we're doing fine, Blossom sighed. Just then, a barely recognizable rumble echoed throughout the city. While Buttercup and Bubbles didn't hear it, Blossom did as she frowned and straightened upwards. Did you hear that? Blossom asked. Bubbles tilted her head a little, confused. Hear what? After she said that, though, a louder rumble echoed, just audible enough for Buttercup and Bubbles to hear. Another portal? Buttercup asked, brightening. Suddenly, the girls heard screams in the distance. After sharing a look, the girls flew off to where the screams were coming from. As they got closer to the scene and landed, they were immediately pushed by hands belonging to terrified and frantic people running in the opposite direction. At first, the girls were confused as to why people were running. That is, until Bubbles looked up, her eyes growing wide and terrified. I don't think that's a portal, Bubbles whispered. Blossom and Buttercup confusedly followed Bubbles' gaze until they too were taken by shock. That was because a large shadow was coming around the corner of a building. As it appeared into view, it looked like a large robot, twice as large as the buildings, and it was slowly approaching the people who were now running for their lives. Is that the arena trap? Buttercup asked slowly. Blossom nodded with a gulp. Sure is. Buttercup then glared as she threw her hands up in the air. Why is it so damn huge? As the girls looked back down, they saw more and more people fleeing, some of them even abandoning the robots they were destroying. In the distance, they could see someone. It was a girl with brown hair who was helping up people who tripped or fell, helping them flee. Everyone, stay back! It's an arena trap, the girl shouted. Buttercup squinted, trying to see farther. That girl's helping people, but she's gonna get caught by the trap. Just then, 3 robots appeared around the girl, catching her by surprise. As they closed in around her, she took action and attacked. She rapidly touched the robots with all of her fingers, which, to the 3's shock, caused each robot to float into the air. Looking exhausted, the girl touched her fingers together, causing the robots to come crashing down. But then, as one fell, it took her down with her, trapping her underneath robot debris. Wow, how did she lift the robots up? Bubbles wondered. More importantly, she's trapped from the robot metal, Buttercup yelled. Sure enough, the girl was struggling to get out from underneath the destroyed robots. But due to her exhaustion, she was unable to free herself, as the arena trap drew nearer and nearer. Someone needs to help her, Bubbles exclaimed. But as the girls looked around, the people who did notice were either slowly backing away or frozen in shock. No one was scrambling to help the girl, who was now calling for help herself. The people in this reality really are pussies, Buttercup said, disgusted. Blossom looked back at the arena trap, who was getting closer, and tensed in a fighting position. Guess we have to save the day again. We need to push that robot back. Right, Bubbles and Buttercup replied in unison. But before the girls could move, someone else already did. Someone was running towards the robot, prompting the girls to stare in shock. Someone is going to help, Bubbles gasped. Just then, the person leapt into the air at an abnormally high height. As he did, he started to glow green, as green energy came off of him in waves. Then, he seemed to throw a punch as he shouted something that everyone could hear. Smash! And with that, the boy punched the arena trap in the face. The sheer force of the punch pushed it back several feet and into a building. The crowd watching gasped, especially the girls. Wow, Buttercup exclaimed. That one punch took out the whole bot, Bubbles added. Blossom, meanwhile, kept her eyes on the boy as he seemed to float in midair. But that only lasted for a split second, and he started to fall, which prompted another round of screams. As the girls' eyes grew wide, they didn't waste another word as they flew away from the crowd and towards the falling boy. Bubbles, Buttercup, grab his legs, Blossom shouted. With a collective nod, Buttercup and Bubbles reached the boy and quickly took hold of 1 foot each. As the boy's upper half still dropped, Blossom quickly caught him, supporting his upper back and head. In the girl's arms, he was barely conscious, his eyes only a tiny bit open. Slowly, the girls flew down to the ground and set him gently on the ground next to the girl trapped under the debris, who stared at them in shock and amazement. As soon as the boy was properly set down, the girls rushed over to the pile of debris, looking down at the girl. "We'll help get you out of here," Blossom said. The girl's eyes brightened, looking eternally grateful. "Thank you." But before the girls could move a muscle, they heard a mechanical groan, as well as more screams. Apparently, with its face caved in and after being blasted into a building, the arena trap could still function as it pushed itself away from the building. "Hold that thought," Blossom sighed, before looking at her sisters with a determined expression. "Let's go, girls." Together, the three blasted up into the sky to face the wounded arena trap. "Bullet formation, let's go," Blossom shouted. After she said that, the girls flew towards the arena trap, side by side. Moving in a complicated fashion, the girls flew up and around each other so fast that their flight trails became one large rainbow comet. Now, as soon as the comet was formed, the girls flew at top speed right through the arena trap's chest. This punctured a gaping hole into it, causing the robot to malfunction. Finally, it fell backwards and crashed into the ground, being destroyed with one final explosion. This caused a strong gust of wind that blasted everyone's faces. After the robot fell, the girls slowed down and separated, flying back to where the girl and Deku were, landing on the ground gracefully. Looking tired, the girls plopped down on the floor. "We'll free you. Just give us a second," Blossom panted. While the girl looked grateful for a few seconds, that look turned into one of nausea, as she quickly turned around and puked. To the crowd, they were shown a weirdly depressing sight, with 3 young girls sitting and out of breath, a girl puking, and a boy currently unconscious with a broken arm and broken legs. Just then, Present Mike's voice spoke over the intercom. "Time's up. That's it for our practical." In the designated UA monitor room, footage from the entrance exam played, replaying notable events and moments that occurred during it. It mostly showed people using their quirks in various ways to destroy robots. There were a select few being shown that showcased the most innovative and flashy ways to take down robots with quirks. And some of the most notable participants being shown were Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. Some of US staff watched the clips closely, trying to gauge which of the participants looked to be prime candidates for UA High. But they always ended up looking at the 3 12-year-old girls completely decimating robots left and right. Finally, Nezu, one of the US staff there, said, "We sure have promising future students for UA." Another US staff member agreed with Nezu's statement. "You got that right. Look at those skills and tricks. These people have some very impressive quirks." After he said that, someone spoke in the back, prompting everyone to turn around. It was allmight, and he was saying the thing that everyone was thinking about. "I believe the most promising ones are in test site A." There really was a lot going on at that site. Nezu smiled as he turned back to the monitor controls. "That's right. Let's go over the highlights, shall we?" Soon, the monitors showed different people showcasing their quirks. It prominently showed the 3 girls as they destroyed robots and dodged attacks. "Who are those little girls?" a US staff member mused. "I believe that they are Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru Utonium. They come all the way from Hasu City in Tokyo," Nezu replied. Hasu City a bit far from here, another one remarked. Either way, they're really strong. I can't seem to place what kind of quirk they have, a third one added. Well, whatever quirk they do have, it's clearly refined. Each of the three raked up 3 of the highest scores in the exam overall. The first one stated. But they look young, don't they? The file states they're only 12 years old. The second one countered. Nezu smiled. Then perhaps we have talented child prodigies on our hands. They will definitely be considered for UA. Any other people worth mentioning? Yeah, that green-haired kid. He was able to nearly destroy that arena trap with a single punch, and yet he has absolutely no combat points. I wonder how that's possible, given his clearly strong quirk. The first one answered. Well, you've seen him after that punch, the second one protested. The sheer force of it broke his legs and right arm. Never thought I'd see a quirk today that would have devastating drawbacks, but that boy clearly has one. Regardless, what he did was impressive. That sure earned him a lot of rescue points, so that more than makes up for the lack of combat points. Nezu concluded. The UA staff members agreed. After that, more participants were discussed. Like the girl who was trapped under the robot debris, she earned a lot of rescue points just by helping others get away from the zero-pointer and Katsuki Bakugou. He earned the most combat points, but earned 0 rescue points. But after a few more minutes, the meeting ended and everyone left the room. Nezu and All Might were the last to leave. As they did, All Might had something on his mind. Hey, Nezu, he said. Nezu hummed in response. Those girls, weren't they at the sludge villain incident? Nezu nodded. Yes, those were the girls you saved with the punch. All Might looked impressed. Wow, yes, I remember now. They are good, and you seem to like them. Why did they go to the entrance exam instead of being recommended? Nezu thought for a moment before saying, I wanted to see their quirks in action, and how they would react to fighting robots, and especially how they would deal with the arena trap. All Might nodded. I see, but I wonder what quirks they have. For a moment, Nezu considered telling All Might about how the girls didn't really have quirks per se, and didn't live in Tokyo but rather a whole different universe. But instead, he provided a different response. Perhaps more analysis and monitoring would deduce that, he replied. All Might took the response as a good answer and smiled a bit. Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru, I can't wait to teach those girls. A week later. The letters here, Bubbles shouted excitedly. It had only been a week since the girls completed the entrance exam. But unlike the 10 months before the exam, the week afterwards felt much longer. That was because the letter with the girls' exam results was highly anticipated. It was the make or break of their future with UA, and they worried day in and day out if their skills were good enough. And after a long week of timid waiting and stressing, the results finally arrived. When Bubbles picked up the letter from the doorstep, closed the door, and turned around, she was nearly knocked over by Buttercup and Blossom. Bubbles, give it here, Blossom exclaimed. No, if anything, I'm touching the letter. Buttercup, get your grubby hands off the letter. Miraculously, Bubbles kept a firm hold on the letter and pushed her sisters away. Now, be patient. The more you waste time scrambling and pushing, the more we have to wait to view the results. Bubbles said rather maturely. But the mature front didn't last long, as Bubbles ran to the couch with a grin, her sisters scrambling after her. As they sat down, Bubbles eagerly ripped the envelope open to find a circular disc machine that confused the 3 girls. This doesn't look like a letter, Bubbles mumbled, confused. What is this supposed to be? A frisbee? Buttercup asked, clueless. Blossom then noticed something on the disc. Wait, there's a button. Taking the disc from Bubbles' hands, Blossom pressed the button and set it on the table. Suddenly, the middle of the disc started to glow. A whirring sound was heard, and a virtual video hovered over the disc. A hologram, Blossom exclaimed. We really are living in the future, huh? Buttercup mused. After pressing play on the video showed a black screen before cutting to a close-up of All Might's face, prompting the girls to jump. Eek, Bubbles shrieked. Why is this dude so close to the camera? Personal space, please, Buttercup protested. Soon, All Might backed away from the camera and posed. Hello, participants. I am here. Recognize me? Number 1 hero, and the symbol of peace, All Might declared. Bubbles brightened. Hey, he was at that monster attack that happened when we first came here? He punched the sludge guy away, didn't he? Blossom's eyes grew wide and sparkly. And he's the number 1 hero too. I have to get his autograph. I have to. Buttercup sighed. Oh no, your crazed hero fanatic side is showing, Bloss. Before the girls could talk more, All Might spoke again. Why, hello there, Momoko, and Miyako, and Kaoru too. The triplet child prodigies. I gotta say, you were impressive at the exam. Buttercup's face went blank. Who the hell is Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru? Blossom groaned. OMG, Buttercup, how many times do I have to explain this? Those are our fake names. Oh, the names are still stupid. All Might smiled and got closer to the camera. I'm going to let you in on a secret between you and me, girls. I saw you at the entrance exam, and you impressed me. A lot. Despite your young age, you have what it takes. Just take a peek at your scores. After he said that, the video cut to a screenshot of the girls' scores. Blossom Momoko had received 68 combat points. Bubbles Miyako received 57 combat points, and Buttercup Kaoru received 72 combat points. Their rescue points were all the same number, 50. Wait, there were rescue points too, Bubbles asked. Just then, the video cut back to All Might. Now you might be wondering, wait, there were rescue points too? And to that, I say, of course. Every hero in this society must put other people's safety before theirs. A true hero doesn't save for popularity and fame. No, a hero is motivated out of the selflessness of their hearts to rescue others. That was why Yua kept the rescue points category a secret. You girls were perfect examples of courage and rescue. Not only did you save Izuku after he clashed with the bot, but you also finished off the arena trap when it came back for a second round. You showed genuine concern for the people you were saving. And for that, Yua awards you with 50 rescue points each, and with that, you 3 collectively scored at least 400 points. Because of that, you are more than qualified to be in the roster for Class 1A this year. At first, the girls sat on the couch, shocked. But after a few seconds, Blossom broke the silence as the video played. We're in Yua. As soon as she said that, it was as if all hell broke loose. The girls were on their feet, cheering, yelling, and crying as they jumped up and down while hugging each other. We're a part of Yua High. In Class 1A. We're officially on the way. Together, the girls celebrated. Long after the video ended. They danced and laughed and cried happy tears. It was all worth it. The practice, the anguish, the work. All of it got them to where they needed to be. Accepted into Yua High. Obviously, getting into Yua didn't solve all of their problems, but it was an achievement nonetheless. In Yua High, in Class 1A, the girls would learn to get stronger, learn more about this world, and possibly find a way back home. Maybe even make some friends along the way. It was unclear what the girls' future holds, but for once, for one day, they didn't worry about that. For them, it was time to let loose for once and live in the moment. When they had long worn out their voices from squealing and cried their eyes dry, Blossom went to the fridge and poured some soda into cups into fancy wine glasses because this moment was too important to go without them. After handing a cup to Bubbles and Buttercup, Blossom stood in front of the couch, her glass raised. I'd like to make a toast. It's been a long time. But it feels like yesterday when we got ready at home and took off to fight crime. The professor was cooking breakfast, and we assumed that we would come back after an hour to eat it. How wrong we were. Blossom paused to accentuate the weight of the words. In the back of her mind, she wondered if the breakfast was still there, waiting for her and her sisters to come back home and eat it. But after a moment, she pushed those thoughts away and continued. We've had our ups and downs, our great and mainly not so great days. But now, things are going to change around here. We're going to UA to maybe try and find some answers. Maybe we'll pick up a few things here and there along the way, and hopefully make some friends. But for a moment, just imagine what will happen when we get back. After all of the reuniting and tears are over, we'll have a story to tell to the professor. About how we managed to live in a world where 80% of the world had powers. about how it was a weird experience, yet changed us for the better. We have a lot to learn before that, so let's hope that we learn it. To us. Bubbles and Buttercup jumped up and raised their glasses into the air, big grins on their faces. To us. Those two words stuck with Blossom. As the girls drank the soda and had some dinner, they decided to order pizza. It stuck with her as the girls got ready and slipped into bed. As she snuggled tight with her sisters in the middle, Blossom stared up at the ceiling, bright-eyed and, for once, excited about her future. To us, she whispered into the still air as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. That entrance exam really changed a lot for the girls. One thing that it changed was the overall mood. What used to be gray and boring days were now bright and bustling. After all, it consisted of the girls preparing for the first day of school. Uniforms were picked out, information about school schedules and teachers were explained, hero costumes were designed, and school supplies were crammed into color-coordinated backpacks. The girls weren't underprepared for this. If anything, they were overprepared. The girls never really went to a real school. Sure, there was kindergarten. But due to rising crime rates and Townsville's demand for the girls growing more and more, the girls dropped out of school in the first grade. But homeschooling more than made up for things when it came to knowledge. After all, the girls' dad wasn't called the professor for nothing. But to be in a school with people again, a high school at that, it was nerve-wracking. That was why the girls had to prepare themselves both physically and mentally. Yui wouldn't just test their powers, but their social skills as well. So, when the first day came, the girls were ready to take it on. They quickly exited their apartment and walked down the streets of Musatafu. "Can't we just fly?" Buttercup complained. Blossom rolled her eyes. "For once, Buttercup, you can't rely on powers all the time. It wouldn't kill you to walk and take a train." Bubbles looked excited. "I can't wait to go on the train. I'm gonna say hi to everybody I meet and give them the lock-eye bracelets I bought from the store." Buttercup looked at Bubbles with a deadpan expression. "You do that, and I'll deny that we're sisters." Soon, the girls were able to get to the train station and get on the train headed for Ua High. As the train made its way along the route, Buttercup and Bubbles chatted about what their first day of school would be like. "If I see one thing regarding actual studying, I'm leaving. It's a freaking hero school, so I better see some action," Buttercup remarked. "What I want to see is the quirks, especially the cute ones. If quirks can make Mr. Nezu look like that, then I want to see and hug all of the cutie pataties I find," Bubbles exclaimed. "What about you, Bloss? What are you looking forward to?" Buttercup asked. Blossom smiled. "I'm glad you asked." After she said that, Blossom unzipped her backpack and hauled out a big book. On the cover, in sparkly and glittery words, it said, "Hero Autographs." Buttercup and Bubbles looked at the book, then at Blossom, who shrugged. "A girl's gotta be prepared. It's a hero school, which means that there'll be heroes left and right, and I am making it a mission to receive every single signature of every single hero. I do not care. This will be my prized possession, next to my manga collection." Buttercup blinked. "Next thing I know, you'll be stealing their hair too." "Don't be silly, Buttercup. I can always get that off the internet." Blossom replied casually as she put the book away. Just then, the train pulled into the station, stopping at its destination. Excitedly, the girls got off and made their way to Ua. Soon, they walked into the glass building and walked around inside, looking for their class. "I wonder where Class 1A is," Bubbles said. At that moment, the girls came across a rather tall door labeled with big red letters that said Class 1A. Huh. As the girls stood there, facing the door, they started to look nervous. Blossom started to rub her arms as if she was cold. Buttercup started to fidget with her fingers, and Bubbles held tight to her kawaii purple octopus plush toy. She got it on her birthday as a temporary replacement for Octi. "Okay, girls, we have nothing to worry about. Think of this like a villain attack with a very easy villain," Blossom said, reassuring herself just as much as her sisters. "Yeah, only there's less punching and more socializing," Buttercup pointed out. "Right? Well, my point is we can do this. We can do this," Blossom reaffirmed. Bubbles and Buttercup nodded. "We can do this," they repeated in unison. With that in mind, Blossom opened the door, and the girls stepped inside. As soon as they did, the atmosphere changed immediately. Instead of a nervous and lonely vibe, there was now a lively and chatty vibe. Most of their classmates were there, talking and laughing. None of them seemed to notice until the door closed, which drew their attention to the three girls. Blossom froze, Bubbles grew wide-eyed, and Buttercup tensed. Hey?" Blossom greeted timidly. Instead of reacting icily, everyone else brightened up and greeted the girls back. "Hi," they all exclaimed in unison. Once they did, the girls relaxed, grateful that their classmates weren't standoffish like they first presumed. Just then, some classmates came up to them and pulled each of the girls away to different sides. Bubbles was pulled away by a girl that was completely invisible. Once she was near the other class one of girls, the invisible girl talked to her. "Hey, you must be Miyako, right?" she asked cheerily. At first, Bubbles was about to say, "Miyako, I'm Bubbles." But she quickly caught herself and revised her response. "Yeah, and you are," Bubbles replied. Even though the girl was completely invisible, which unnerved Bubbles just a tiny bit, she appeared to be very excited and happy. "I'm Toru Hagakure. Nice to meet you, and I gotta say, I like your ponytails." Bubbles brightened at the compliment. "Really? Thank you. I like your..." For a second, her compliment faltered as she realized that Hagakure was invisible. Quickly, she said the first thing that came to mind. "Uniform." Hagakure squealed a little. "I know, right? These uniforms are super cute." Bubbles felt relieved for a second that the compliment worked in its own way, before realizing that she did find the uniforms super cute. "I thought I was the only one. I really love how the blazer complements the skirt." "Exactly, and the color choices really work together too." As Hagakure and Bubbles were hitting it off, Buttercup was pulled away by a boy with really blonde hair with a black lightning bolt design. "Hey, it's Kaoru, right? Anyways, I'm Denki, and I need your input," he told Buttercup. Buttercup blinked, bewildered. Input on what, exactly? Soon, the two reached a desk, where some of the boys were gathered around. On the desk was an unopened soda can. "So, we've been debating if it's possible to drink a can of soda in 5 seconds, Denki explained. "It obviously is, but these bozos don't want to believe me." "Because it's not true," a boy with a tail piped up. "The human body is incapable of ingesting that much soda in only 5 seconds. "You don't know what you're talking about, Ojiro," Denki retorted. "I've seen it happen before." "Really?" a boy with a bird head asked. "Where?" Denki hesitated, as he furrowed his brow in deep thought. "I don't know, but I saw it. Okay, let her decide who's right. So, Kaoru, what do you think, huh?" As the boys looked at her, Buttercup looked nervous for a moment. But that moment passed as she crossed her arms. "Course it can happen. I've done it." Denki looked surprised. "You have?" Buttercup nodded, a grin showing on her face, and pointed to the can. "Yeah, mind if I demonstrate?" As the boys shook their heads and she took the can, a short boy with purple hair scoffed. "No way is a girl gonna drink that much soda in 5 seconds." Just then, Buttercup opened the can, bent her head back, and put the soda to her lips. As she drank it and Denki counted the seconds, the boys started to stare in awe. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At exactly 1, Buttercup put down the soda and wiped her mouth. "Check it." With suspicion, Denki picked up the can, only for his eyes to widen until they were the size of dinner plates. "Yo, it's empty," Denki hollered. After he said that, the boys clambered to take a look. "No way. You're lying. That's not physically possible." As the boys checked the can, Denki started to slowly chant. "Kaoru, Kaoru, Kaoru Koru." Soon, when they saw that the can was empty and their shock passed, the boys chanted too. "Kaoru, Kaoru, Kaoru." As they did, Buttercup grinned. "That's nothing, I'm telling you. I can also do this too." As Buttercup chatted with the boys, Blossom was pulled away by a brown-haired girl with rosy cheeks. As she did, Blossom realized her as the girl that was at the entrance exam. "You're Momoko, aren't you?" the girl said cheerily, before Blossom could say anything. "The girl that saved me." Blossom chuckled sheepishly. "I wouldn't say saved. I left you under that pile of robot debris for a while. But you did eventually. Also, you took down that arena trap. That really was brave. If it was me, I would have fainted." The girl giggled. Blossom laughed too. "Yeah, I was close to it." After laughing, the girl said, "But, for real, I'm really grateful you and your sisters did something. I want to thank you." Blossom brightened at those words. "Thanks. That means a lot, The girl straightened, noticing that Blossom was trying to say her name. "Oh, my name's Ochako. Ochako Uraraka." Blossom smiled. "Nice to meet you, Ochako." As the two hung out at a desk, Ochako looked around at the classroom. "Can't believe that this will be our day-to-day life for basically the whole year. Are you excited?" Ochako asked. "Yeah, but mostly nervous," Blossom replied, chuckling at the last sentence. "Same. I'm kind of intimidated by some of the people here, like that blonde guy." Blossom followed Ochako's line of sight to a guy sitting in a chair, his feet kicked up on the desk. "Is that?" Blossom started to ask. "Katsuki Bakugou," Ochako finished. "Yeah, you've seen him before, right? At that sludge incident." Blossom nodded. "Didn't know he was in this class." Ochako shrugged. "From what I heard, he was a prime candidate for this class. He got the most combat points out of everybody at the UA entrance exam." Blossom's eyes widened. "Really?" "Mei-chan, most of the people here got high scores. We're the top class after all. Class 1A usually gets the attention when it comes to the topic of UA. Makes me a little nervous." Blossom nodded, getting nervous herself. "Yeah." Ochako noticed and gave Blossom a smile. "But hey, at least we got each other. Feels a little less scary when you have people supporting you." Blossom found herself looking at her classmates and most specifically her sisters, who were already making friends with their classmates. As she did, she smiled too. It does. As Class 1A hung out together and more students came in, it was then that Blossom realized that their teacher wasn't there at all. And apparently Ochako noticed that too. "Huh. The teacher's not here. I wonder where he—" Just then, the door flew open, startling and silencing everyone in the room. Mr. Aizawa walked in slowly, as if he wasn't aware that he was late. Once he reached his desk up front, every student scrambled to their seats, including Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup, who all sat at the front. "Mr. Aizawa's teaching this class?" Bubbles asked. "I guess so. I knew he was a teacher, but I didn't know that he would teach our class," Blossom mused. As he stood at his desk, Aizawa began to speak in a rather bored tone. "Hello, class. Welcome to school orientation. To start off, I'd like you to go down to the locker room and change into your P uniforms. When you're done, meet me down at the athletic field." And with that, even though he only said a couple of sentences, Aizawa walked out of the room. Once he did, everyone looked at each other with confusion before slowly getting up and following. As the girls got up, they looked confused as well. "Why are we going to the P grounds? Was that on the schedule?" Bubbles asked. "Nope," Blossom answered with a frown. "According to the daily schedule I received, we're supposed to go to a ceremony the school's hosting to welcome students." "Well, unless we're doing the ceremony outside, I don't think we're going," Buttercup stated, raising an eyebrow. Blossom sighed as she looked straight. It's only been 5 minutes, but this is turning out to be a weird class. As the class went to the locker rooms and changed, they all gathered outside on the athletic field, nervous and confused. Once everyone was there, Aizawa, who was standing in front of the group, spoke. "For today, you all will be participating in a series of exercises I've designed. This will put your quirks to the test, as well as quiz your athleticism and physical skills." Ochako raised her hand timidly and asked the question that everyone was thinking. Aren't we supposed to head to the opening day ceremony?" she asked. Aizawa shook his head. "Class 1A doesn't go to the ceremonies. Instead, you go through a rigorous test called the Quirk Apprehension Test that will determine if you are fit for US curriculum." "Wasn't that already determined by the entrance exam?" a student questioned. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. "In the entrance exam, you auditioned for the judges and the principal, not for me. This is my class, and I'll run it how I see fit. I will rank your scores from best to worst, and if you are unable to keep up with the test, or if your score's at the bottom, then you are expelled from UA." At this, the students went into a shocked uproar. What? On the first day? It's not even the first day, it's orientation. Aizawa raised one hand, cutting off all protests. I suggest you quit it with the complaints, unless you don't want to be here. In that case, the exit's over there. The students were silent, with wide and scared eyes. The girls stood there, scared to the bone. They thought all of their troubles were over when they had gotten into UA. But, as it turns out, it was only beginning. First up is the 50-meter dash, Aizawa explained as the class came up to a track. This one's simple. You race against an opponent, and that machine over there calculates how quickly it takes you to get from one side to the other. The lower the seconds, the better the score is. Blossom sighed as she looked at the field nervously. Okay, sounds easy enough. She turned back to Bubbles and Buttercup, about to say their names. But just then, she realized that some people were glancing at them, prompting her to say their fake names instead. Miyako. Kaoru. You got that, right? Bubbles and Buttercup looked confused and blinked in unison. Huh? Blossom's face was blank before forcing a strained smile. Miyako, my bubbly sister. Kaoru, my darling Buttercup. You heard what Mr. Aizawa said, Blossom said through gritted teeth. After a few moments, Bubbles and Buttercup caught on. Oh, yeah, don't sweat it, Minako. We got this, Buttercup said. Blossom's eye twitched subtly before saying, it's Momoko. Soon, the first people were up to run. One of them was a girl with long green hair, who sort of resembled a frog. Bubbles immediately had to repress a squeal because she found the girl adorable. The other was a boy with glasses, who the girls realized was the same guy at the entrance exam, who had called out Deku for mumbling. So, Mr. Strict Guy got in. I feel like Blossom and him would hit it off. Buttercup snickered. Blossom shot her a glare, but ignored her. As the two stood at the starting line, Aizawa then gave them the word to go. After that, things happened so fast that it gave the girls mental whiplash. 1 second, they were standing there, and the next, they were on the other side. As a breeze created from the two's speed tousled the girls' hair back and forth, they blinked with wide eyes. Wow, that was fast, Bubbles whispered. After a few moments consisting of Aizawa checking the scores, he then announced the scores. Ida, you passed the finish line in 3 seconds. As for Isui, you passed the finish line in 5 seconds. Buttercup's jaw dropped. No way. They have to have the ability to fly because no human can go that fast. But they're not exactly human, Buttercup, Blossom whispered so that no one overhears. They have quirks. Blossom then looked straight at Ida and Isui, who came back to the group of congratulating classmates, and narrowed her eyes. Which means we have competition. After that, more participants came up to compete. Everyone so far was getting scores that were all under 10 seconds. Because of this, Blossom started to worry. It was a fact that the girls had an advantage over their classmates, due to their years of crime fighting. Yet that comforting fact did nothing to comfort Blossom at all. If anything, it worried her. What if even with the experience, the girls failed? Despite their hero experience, the girls were still more or less fishes out of water, which meant that they could do the wrong thing without knowing it, a thing that could get them disqualified. Just then, Aizawa announced the next pair of participants to go. Up next is Bakugou and Kaoru, he said. Buttercup tensed as she looked at Bakugou with a glare. This further worsened Blossom's anxiety. When Buttercup's racing, Bubbles or Blossom won't be there to stop her from losing her temper. For all Blossom knew, Buttercup could punch Bakugou in the face halfway through the race, which would basically be a one-way ticket out of UA. That was why, before Buttercup left, Blossom grabbed her wrist. Buttercup, Blossom hissed under her breath. Whatever you do, don't lose your temper. I am begging you. Be the bigger person. Buttercup yanked her hand away as she rolled her eyes. You say that as if I'm just waiting to punch Boom Boom Baby in the face. I am not that irritable, you know. As she left, Bubbles came up next to Blossom, cheering. Good luck, Kaoru, she exclaimed. Please don't get us kicked out. Please don't get us kicked out. Blossom muttered to herself with wide eyes. As Buttercup stood next to Bakugou on the starting line, she glanced over at him, who was getting ready. Hey, man, I just want to say that no matter who wins, good game. Buttercup said as she crouched. Bakugou looked over at Buttercup with a deadpan expression, and after a moment of tense silence, he replied, "There will be no matter who wins. I worked hard for this, and I'm not going to be beaten by a freaking 10-year-old. Bakugou replied, his voice dull. As she registered the sentence, Buttercup's eye twitched before looking straight with a indignated stare. "Oh, it's on, you sissy," she hissed. Blossom, overhearing this conversation, whimpered softly as she put 2 fingers on the bridge of her nose. "Oh God," she whined. Finally, after a few seconds, Aizawa shouted, "Begin." In a split second, Bakugou was off. Putting his hands by his sides, explosions blasted from them, propelling him forward. For a moment, it looked like he was in the lead. But just then, a bright green light appeared beside him. It was Buttercup, who was flying at the same speed as him. Together, the 2 locked eyes, with Bakugou being bewildered and Buttercup looking smug. "Aw, cute," Buttercup simply said in a baby voice. Without sparing another word, Buttercup doubled her speed and flew all the way to the finish line, a split second before Bakugou crossed it. As they landed, Aizawa checked and announced the score. "Bakugou, that took you 413 seconds. Kaoru, that took you 402 seconds. A close shave." Aizawa noted. Bakugou looked like he was about to lose it, which he was. "What?" Buttercup, meanwhile, looked at him with a smooth and self-satisfied smile. "Ah, what do you know? You just got beaten by a freaking 10-year-old. Buttercup teased as she walked back to her cheering classmates. At first, Bakugou stood there, shocked and furious. But the shock didn't last long and turned into full-on fury. "I'll kill that tiny tot," he growled to himself before walking back to his spot in the crowd. As Buttercup went over to her sisters, she crossed her arm, still smiling. "Serves that son of a bitch right. Want to call me a 10-year-old? Doesn't change the fact that I'm better than you." Buttercup laughed. Blossom sighed, a little relieved but still on edge. "I'm proud of you, Buttercup, but—" She looked at Bakugou, who was staring at them with a murderous expression, not bothering to disguise it. She then looked back at Buttercup while sweat dropping. "We basically have a target on our backs now," she finished with a gulp. Buttercup rolled her eyes. "PFFT. Like I'm intimidated by anything he tries to do." After she said that, Aizawa called up the next people. "Next is Miyako and Mainta." Bubbles brightened as she jumped with excitement, her stuffy bouncing in her arms. "Ooh, I'm up next," she squealed. Before her sisters could say anything, Bubbles skipped over to the starting line, next to Mainta, who looked at her weirdly as he stretched. "Are you carrying a doll with you?" he asked her, blinking in confusion. Bubbles grinned as she stuck out the octopus for Mainta to see. "Like him? I named him Taco. Do you know that it means octopus in Japanese? He's super cute," she gushed. Mainta stared at her for a moment before smiling slyly. "Oh, I've got this in the bag," he said, mostly to himself as he looked straight. However, when Aizawa shouted, "Begin," and the 2 set off, Bubbles disappeared in a blue flash, over at the finish line in seconds, just as Mainta reached the halfway point of the track. Due to his surprise, he slowed down, stumbling past the finish line seconds after. "Miyako, your score is 3 seconds. Mainta, yours is 6. Mainta's mouth dropped open. But she." Bubbles, meanwhile, turned to him with a friendly smile. "Nice meeting you, Mainta. Cool hair, by the way," she complimented as she skipped away. As Bubbles took her place by her sisters, Mainta finally stumbled off, wide-eyed and partly in awe. "Wow," he whispered. After that, only Blossom was left. As Aizawa called some of the last remaining pairs, she did her best to keep her cool. Her sisters were able to get good scores. She will too. For our last 3 participants, we have Momoko, Ajiro, and Midoriya. As Blossom looked around to her opponents, she saw the 2 take their places. There was the guy with the tail, but the second person made Blossom's eyes widen. It was Deku, the boy at the sludge attack, and the boy at the entrance exam who almost took out a huge robot with one single punch. "Shit, I'm screwed," Blossom thought as she blinked. As she stumbled blindly to the start line, her sisters cheered behind her. "You got this, Momoko," Bubbles cheered. "Don't fuck this up," Buttercup added. Blossom shot Buttercup a look that seemed to convey in a sarcastic tone. "Thanks for the encouragement, Buttercup." As Blossom stood on the line, she found herself glancing several times at Deku. Izukumidoriya seems to be his real name, given that people called him either of those names. After a tense moment, Izuku looked at her, which prompted her to look straight. "Good luck, Momoko." Blossom looked at Izuku to find him smiling. Although she felt all kinds of nervous, she felt a little appreciative of the gesture of good sportsmanship. "You too," she replied with a smile of her own before looking straight. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Aizawa shouted, "Begin!" After that, the world around Blossom was a blur as she ran to the finish line using her super speed. It was over much quicker than she expected as she skidded to a stop. Ojiro came to a stop next to her not long after. But, to her surprise, it took much too many seconds for Izuku to reach the finish line. Judging by the way he was running, it didn't look like he was using his quirk at all. That was the last thing Blossom expected, as she expected him to be the first one finished. But as Aizawa read out the scores, it proved the opposite. "Momoko, you finished at a time of 3 seconds. Ojiro, you finished at 5, and Midoriya, you finished at 7. As Blossom blinked with shock, her two sisters cheered. "That's our sister," Bubbles said happily. "Yeah, you showed him," Buttercup exclaimed. As Blossom walked back, she didn't know what to feel. Obviously, she felt relieved that she and her sisters did well on the 50-meter dash, but she also felt disappointed to a very tiny degree. Blossom didn't know why, but it seemed like she wanted competition that would come very close to beating her. Blossom shook her head, clearing the nagging feeling away. "You are so weird, Blossom. Be glad that you won," she chided herself. After that, the following tests were easy enough. Grip tests, seated long jumps, and repeated side steps. The girls could keep up with, if not excel above their classmates for those tests. Once those tests were over though, it seemed like the real test was coming up right afterwards. For our 5th test, we have a ball throw. The rules are as the name suggests. You throw the ball as far as you can. The higher the distance, the higher the score. Bakugou, you come up first. As Bakugou walked up to where Aizawa was standing, Aizawa gave him a ball. Now, according to your middle school records, your last ball throw came to be about 60 meters. Let's see if you can top that. Bakugou was silent as he fixed his eyes forward, gauging the ball. It was only a second of waiting before he lunged forward and threw the ball. As he went through the motion of throwing it, the ball started to smoke with fire. So when it was thrown, the ball rocketed through the sky as explosions pushed it forward. After a short moment, the device in Aizawa's hand lit up, showing Bakugou's new score. 705 2 meters. Impressive, Aizawa noted. At those words, everyone made a noise of shock and awe. The 3 girls especially looked incredulous. "That's almost half of a mile," Blossom whispered. Buttercup frowned. "Okay, I might have to give the dickwad some credit." "That was cool," Bubbles squealed. "The way it just blasted off like a rocket." Apparently, Bubbles wasn't the only person to think that it was cool. Multiple students congratulated and cheered for Bakugou as he walked back to the group, looking smug at his newfound attention. But the cheers didn't last long, as Aizawa called up the next student. Just like the 50-meter dash, students were called up to demonstrate their skills and quirks. And once again, Blossom felt nervous, which coincidentally pissed her off too. That was because her anxiety was starting to get annoying. So far, Blossom has done nothing to prove that she was in any way behind her classmates. If anything, she was doing the opposite, and proving that she was more ahead than her class in terms of power. And yet, Blossom felt apprehensive. As for why, she has no clue. "Next up is Miyako Utonium," Aizawa announced, once the most recent student to try out had gone back to the group. Bubbles started to walk up, until she looked down at her stuffy, just realizing that she couldn't really throw anything with a stuffed octopus in one of her hands. She then turned to the nearest person she stopped next to, which happened to be a guy with spiky red hair. "Sorry to bother you, but could you hold Taco for me for just one teensy moment?" Bubbles asked. While the guy looked a little surprised at the offer, he smiled. Sure." Bubbles brightened while putting Taco into his hands. "Thank you." With the guy holding the plushie receiving curious and off-put stares from the people around him, Bubbles skipped up to her spot and took the ball from Aizawa. After eyeing the ball for a little, she then grinned. Go time. After that, what happened next was a blur. Bubbles rapidly spun around while holding the ball, blue electricity swarming her hands. Then, she suddenly stops, throwing the ball in the process. Glowing in blue, the ball blasted away for a few seconds before Aizawa's monitor lit up. 576 meters. Well done, Aizawa announced. Behind Bubbles, cheers erupted from some students, to which she reacted to with a smile. She then walked up to the guy holding taco, and he handed it to her. Thanks again, she chirped as she went back to her sisters. As Bubbles drew near, Buttercup smirked. Something tells me that you're gonna be the class favorite, she chuckled. Bubbles tilted her head a tiny bit. What makes you say that? Buttercup jabbed her thumb at something behind Bubbles, prompting her to turn around and see people waving with an adoring look, while some people whispered, Bro, how did a cute kid end up here? OMG, she's so adorable, I wanna cry. Yes, I held her stuffy, so manly. Bubbles waved back with a smile, before shrugging to Buttercup. I guess I am. Just then, Aizawa said, Kaoru, your turn. Buttercup flashed a grin before walking up to her spot and taking the ball. As she tossed the ball up and down into her hand, she frowned as she thought about her throw. I have to admit, Bakugou was good with his throw. Am I ever gonna tell him that? Hell no, which is why I gotta top this son of a beach. Yeah, like he'd stand a chance against me. With that in mind, Buttercup used her motivation to throw the ball hard. As she threw it, green fire swirled the ball and it rocketed through the air. After a few seconds, Aizawa said the score. 705 meters. Exactly the same as Bakugou's, Aizawa said, a little surprised by the sheer coincidence. At those words, Buttercup couldn't help but gape, completely in shock. You're effing lying, are you kidding me? As claps came from shocked and amazed classmates, Buttercup rushed back to her sisters as fast as she could without making it obvious. But despite her efforts, she still caught the eye of an incredulous yet pissed Bakugou, and heard a simple yet infuriating word come out of his mouth. Copycat. Buttercup didn't fully hear and register the word until she was back in her spot with her sisters. When she did though, she nearly marched off to let Bakugou have it. She would have been able to do it even. That is, if Blossom hadn't gotten a firm hold on her wrist, keeping her in place. Remember, keep your temper in check. She growled just audibly enough for Buttercup to hear it. Buttercup glared as she yanked away her hand. You try dealing with the most stuck-up motherfucker in the world, then we'll talk. Language, geez, you've been cursing so much, it's starting to get on my nerves. Blossom huffed. Buttercup was still for a moment, then leaned forward so that she was a few inches away from Blossom's face. Fuck, Buttercup whispered. Blossom stared at Buttercup before taking a deep breath and saying, I hate you. Before the girls could escalate from their bickering to a full-blown argument, Aizawa called up a person that drew not just their, but everyone's attention. Midoriya, your turn, he had said. At those words, virtually everyone turned to look at Izuku, who walked up to his spot. He looked nervous, the same way he had been looking for all of the tests. But there was something else apparent on his face that caught everyone, specifically Blossom, off guard, a look of sharp focus and resolved determination. Everyone would soon know why that is, as soon as Izuku was given the ball and was ready to throw. For a second, he stood still, but that quickly ended as he planted his feet firmly on the ground, leaned back, and started to throw the ball. A look of sheer motivation on Izuku's face was visible, as his arm flashed by in a blur. But what truly surprised everyone was that when his arm moved, green light and energy swarmed his arm and the ball. With that visible indication, it didn't take long for people to connect the dots. Izuku was using his quirk, his highly destructive, bone-breaking, consequential quirk. But as quickly as the green energy came, it completely disappeared. Izuku stumbled forward, dropping the ball next to him, hardly an inch away from him. Judging from his wide eyes and bewildered expression, he hadn't intended for his power to suddenly evaporate. But as Aizawa spoke, it was clear that he had. That's enough. Before you tear yourself apart. Everyone looked at Aizawa, who was swiftly walking towards Izuku. He didn't look like his usual tired and bored persona. Instead, his once lifeless hair was now waving around by an unseen wind. His scarf looked like gray snakes as they spiraled around his neck and stretched out. And his eyes, which were once gray, were now bright red. Everyone backed away a few inches, clearly startled, as they had never seen this side of their teacher before. And, clearly, neither did the girls. "What the hell?" Buttercup mumbled as she gulped. "How can he do that?" As soon as people around them started to mutter and whisper to each other, Buttercup got her answer. "Is that Mr. Aizawa's quirk?" "No way. Mr. Aizawa is Eraserhead." "For real? No joke?" Bubbles frowned. "Who's Eraserhead?" Blossom's eyes widened as she looked at her teacher, as she remembered all of the research about Eraserhead she had conducted. Her extensive knowledge of pro heroes came in handy. Eraserhead's a pro hero. He may not be a well-known one, but he is a notorious fighter, especially when it comes to disarming. His quirk is Erasure, which means that he has the ability to completely cancel out a quirk, rendering the target useless. It only works on emitter quirks, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't work on us, since we don't really have quirks, but I don't want to find that out anytime soon. Buttercup and Bubbles looked at her with shock, which prompted Blossom to smile sheepishly. "I've done my fair share of research on him," she explained. Before anybody could talk anymore, they were immediately drawn back to the scene before them, when Izuku broke his silence. "Oh, Mr. Aizawa, why did you block my quirk? Did I do something wrong?" Izuku squeaked. Aizawa looked visibly irritated by Izuku's questions. "That's what you're wondering. Why? I'll tell you why. You were clearly about to use your quirk to increase your score, without even considering what would happen. I've seen you at the entrance exam, Midoriya, when you took on that arena trap with your quirk, and your quirk ended up hurting you more than the actual arena trap. You have to understand that no matter how desperate you are, you can't just use your quirk and just think, oh, it doesn't matter if I hurt myself or people around me if it means that I get what I want. That's not the thinking of a hero. Which, quite frankly, I don't believe you can be." Just hearing Aizawa's words felt like a kick in the stomach. Even the three girls winced at how harsh the words are. Izuku meanwhile lowered his head in shame as Aizawa continued. "Your quirk is strong, Midoriya. However, I suggest that you refrain from pushing yourself when you use it, as your body clearly isn't used to its drawbacks. Heroes can't rescue others if they need other people to rescue them. With that said, I will give you another chance at this throw. Take my advice into account." After he said that, Aizawa finally stepped back, his scarf turning back to normal and his eyes reverting back to their normal color. As they watched this unfold, the three girls looked concerned. "Poor guy, it's not his fault that his superpower breaks his bones," Bubbles protested. Buttercup sighed. "Seems like everyone piles on him. But you have to admit, Mr. Aizawa has a point," Blossom pointed out. "It is risky to try and use a power that you know will hurt you, just so that your maneuver succeeds. It's also a rash decision to make, sacrificing yourself to get what you want." Buttercup looked at Blossom. "Don't we do that sometimes?" Blossom hesitated, recalling all of the fights that the girls have had so far. She couldn't exactly say no, as it would be a lie. She remembered many examples of the girls using a catastrophic aspect of their powers as a last resort. But they did that because it was their last resort, not because they were reckless. Right? Before Blossom could answer the question though, that was when Izuku tried out his throw for a second time. As he threw it though, something was different. Instead of his whole arm glowing, one of the fingers on his throwing hand glowed. As he released the ball, the resulting blast of wind and the soaring ball showed that he had used his quirk. But when he stood up straight, his throwing arm looked relatively unharmed. As everyone looked with shock, Aizawa's monitor beeped, showing the score. "Your score is 705 3 meters," Aizawa whispered, completely stunned. At that, cheers erupted from the class, as their shock turned into complete awe. As Izuku raised his throwing arm, it was then revealed what had happened. When throwing the ball, instead of storing power in his arm, Izuku had stored power in his finger, which he used to help propel the ball. Because of that, the only bones that Izuku broke were in his finger. Compared to the damage that could have happened if Izuku used his whole arm, the injury was severely minor. When Blossom realized this, she was more than shocked and amazed. She was wonderstruck. That kind of thinking, that kind of cleverness. She thought that it only existed in the greatest of heroes. And yet, here this green-haired boy was, who not only took his teacher's advice into account, but took it in stride. That was the kind of person that Blossom wanted to be. Just then, the moment of celebration was immediately cut short by a certain blonde boy who was pushing through the crowd of students. He didn't look awed or pleased or even shocked. In fact, he looked the opposite. He looked enraged. What the hell was that? Immediately, Bakugou's words silenced everyone as they stopped cheering and grew quiet. Meanwhile, Izuku jumped. What do you mean, Kaken?" he squeaked. A look of startling malice crossed Bakugou's face. "What you did was impossible. You've been quirkless for years, and now, all of a sudden, you strut your way into UA and decided to show me up with a quirk you got out of nowhere. What is this, some kind of sick and twisted joke?" Izuku yelped and shook his head frantically. No, you got it twisted, Kaken. I never wanted to show you up. Never. As for the quirk, Before Izuku could finish his explanation, Bakugou looked like he was done with listening and suddenly sprung at Izuku, his hands practically engulfed in explosions and fire. "I'll kill you." The next 3 seconds seemed to happen all too fast. 1 second, Bakugou was seconds away from blasting Izuku in the face. The next, a swarm of pink, blue, and green shot between them. Finally, in the 3rd second, the class was met with a startling sight. Buttercup had grabbed hold of Bakugou's left hand, while Bubbles had grabbed hold of his right. Blossom, meanwhile, had positioned herself defensively in between Izuku and Bakugou, ready to attack if her sisters ever lost their hold on Bakugou. Bakugou blinked, and for a second, stopped releasing explosions from his hands out of bewilderment. "What the?" "That's enough," Blossom shouted. "You shouldn't be attacking people." "Yeah, has anyone ever taught you that it is considered rude to attack someone without a very good reason?" Bubbles asked. "You're going too far. Someone should teach you some manners," Buttercup demanded. After they said that, Bakugou snapped out of his shock and growled darkly. "First, you tiny tots came out of fucking nowhere when I had that sludge villain under control. Then, you have the nerve to show up at UA even though you guys are 5. And now, you've seemed to make it an effort to make my life a living hell. I think it's pretty clear now." As the other 4 looked at him with unease, Bakugou finally snapped as fire swirled around his hands again. "I'm sick of you brats." But before anyone could move though, gray flashed before their eyes. Before the girls knew it, they were wrapped up in a gray scarf, dangling a few inches above the ground. Meanwhile, Bakugou was covered in the gray scarf, his fire gone as he struggled to escape. The only one who wasn't wrapped up was Izuku, who looked like he was about to faint from shock. "That's enough out of all of you," a dark voice said curtly. The 5 turned around to see Aizawa step forward, clearly furious as well. "I swear to you, if you don't stop this behavior, I will send you out of UA High right now. This is unacceptable and just plain immature. As you can see, I'm at my wit's end. So, I'm giving you one more chance to get your act together. Or else you're walking out of this school forever. Do you understand me?" For a minute, the girls were speechless. Not once have they thought that they would get into trouble on the first day. And yet here they were, face to face with a teacher who was very close to expelling them. They couldn't afford to leave. Not now. So, instead of protesting, the girls deflated and hung their heads. "Yes, sir," they said quietly in unison. Aizawa sighed as the gray scarf receded, releasing the girls and Bakugou, who stalked away with a glare to Izuku. The girls walked back to the group, before Blossom was held back by Aizawa's hand blocking her way. "Momoko, as far as I'm concerned, you haven't done the ball throw yet," Aizawa said, his voice softer this time. "You're the last one to go, so if you please." Blossom froze. She forgot all about the ball throw. She couldn't do it now. Not only was she not in the right state of mind, but she was already worrying about how her performance would look. It couldn't compare to Izuku's throw. Not at all. She could picture her classmates' disappointment already. But it looked as if Aizawa wasn't taking no for an answer. Plus, since everyone was looking at her now, the prospect of denying and walking away was out of the question. Because of this, Blossom simply trudged up to her spot and took the ball from Izuku as he walked back. "Good luck," he murmured as he walked away. Blossom turned around to look at Izuku walking back. There it was again. Good luck. Only, it didn't have an encouraging effect on her, and simply worried her more. Was he expecting a good performance out of her? Was everyone? With that thought in mind, Blossom felt like giving up right then and there. But then, she set her eyes forward. She knew that she had to do well. She couldn't give up. If anything, she had to stick with it until the end. So, with newfound determination, Blossom threw the ball as hard as she could. As pink energy made the ball stand out as it soared farther and farther away, Aizawa read out the score. 547 3 meters. Good work. Blossom did a double take at those words, as dread set heavily in her stomach. Bubbles had gotten 576 meters, while Buttercup got 705 2 meters. That meant that Blossom had gotten the least out of her and her sisters. A pitiful score compared to the ones she had gotten so far. As everyone clapped politely, not at all like the cheers that Izuku received, Blossom walked back to her sisters, looking desperate. Bubbles and Buttercup noticed this and tried to cheer her up. That was a good score, Bloss, Buttercup congratulated. Yeah, you did great, Bubbles added. Blossom didn't reply. While she found some appreciation in her sister's compliments, she could tell by their slightly confused glances at each other that they wanted to say more. She knew that her sisters expected a higher score. She couldn't blame them. Blossom herself expected a higher score too. But instead, she didn't get a high or a low score. She got average. And for a former superheroine who had been fighting crime for 7 years, an average score might as well be a low score. Despite the ball throw fiasco, the tests continued on as normal. The last batch of tests weren't so hard: a distance run, seated toe touch, and sit-ups. The girls breezed past them with ease, once again earning high scores. But by the last test, sit-ups, Blossom's ball throw score still laid heavy on her mind. She felt sick to her stomach. Not because she was currently on her 87th sit-up, but because she felt horrible about her score. That was why she was finally telling her sisters about her worries as she did the sit-ups. Let's face it, I sucked at that ball throw, she whined. Bubbles' eyes widened as she kept her hands on Blossom's feet. She, along with Buttercup, was Blossom's partner for sit-ups. What? No, you didn't, she exclaimed. Buttercup, who was sitting to the side and watching, looked offended at Blossom's statement too. Are you kidding me? Your score is literally fine. Blossom groaned as she did her sit-ups a little faster. Exactly, my score was fine. It shouldn't have been fine. It should have been jaw-dropping, awesome, and freaking fantastic. We used to be superheroes, and now look at me. I end up having the most average score out of everyone's. Aw, come on, Blossom. At least, you didn't end up with a low score. You could have done worse. Bubbles reassured her. Blossom finally laid down on the floor, having done exactly 100 sit-ups. I might as well have, she said as she stared up at the ceiling. Just then, a whistle sound cut through the air, gathering everyone's attention. It came from Aizawa as he dropped the whistle in his hands and spoke. That's time. If you are in the middle of a sit-up, please finish it and stop. With that being said, we have completed our final test. Everyone can have a short break while I compile the scores and rank them. I'll call you outside when I'm done. With that, Aizawa left the room, prompting everyone to stand up. As the girls stood up, Blossom narrowed her eyes. This is it. In a few minutes, we'll know our final score, she mumbled. Bubbles held on tight to Taco, burying her face into the purple octopus. I hope we don't get expelled, she whispered. Buttercup scoffed. Will you two have a little more faith in yourself for once? We've literally been exceeding people's expectations. Trust me, we are the ones who are least likely to end up being at the bottom. Blossom hesitated before exhaling a breath she didn't know she was holding, realizing that Buttercup was right. I hope you're right, Blossom finally replied. Unfortunately, the reprieve that the class was given didn't last long. Soon, Aizawa was at the door, telling everyone to come outside. As they all spread out on the field, the class gathered around a board that looked like a leaderboard. These are the rankings of everyone. Remember, #1 is the best score and #23 is the worst, Aizawa noted. Quickly, Blossom pushed her way to the front and scanned the rankings for her name. She almost immediately saw Buttercup's name, which was at the top. Then, she scanned down the names. Momo Yayurazu, Shototodoroki, Katsuki Bakugou, Miyako Utonium, Blossom read aloud, stopping for a moment to silently congratulate Bubbles for getting 5th place. Finally, Blossom found her name, Momoko Utonium, next to the ranking 6th. Once she saw it, Blossom had a mixed reaction. She felt immensely relieved that she was in the top 10 scores and wasn't going home. And yet, she felt disappointed. If only she had tried harder at that ball throw. Despite already finding her name, Blossom found herself looking through the rest of the scores. She saw Tenya Ida Mr. Strict Guy, as Buttercup calls him, right below her, and Ochako in 10th place. But soon, as she looked at the last ranking, she saw someone's name, the name that she least expected. #23, izukumidoriya, Blossom muttered. As soon as the name registered, Blossom felt immediately guilty. She couldn't understand why he was at the bottom, considering that he got one of the best scores at the ball throw. But then, it hit her. The ball throw was Izuku's only exceptional score. As for everything else, he either did pretty average at or got a low score entirely. It seemed that even if Izuku got a bad score at the ball throw, he would still be in last place. Meaning that the ball throw did very little to pull him up the rankings. And, as Blossom looked at him, it seemed like Izuku knew that too, as a look of despair and sadness crossed his face and he hung his head. Before Blossom could make the decision to comfort him, Aizawa spoke to the class. As you see, the rankings are rated from best to worst. If you got a good spot on the rankings, then good for you. As for those with the lowest of scores, this means that you will get expelled. As Aizawa paused, seemingly to accentuate the despair of the students with the lowest scores, he then continued to say something that took everyone by shock. Correction. This means that you would hypothetically get expelled. But you're not. I lied to you. No one was going home in the first place, Aizawa said, with a sly smile. For a minute, the class was in shock. But that moment lasted as they went into an uproar. What? None of us are going home. I can't believe this. Suddenly, Blossom found herself shouting too. Then, why did you tell us we were going to get expelled if we didn't get a good score? I only did that to bring out the best in all of you. You're welcome, Aizawa explained, a hint of smugness in his voice. A chorus of whines rose after he said that. But soon, everyone stopped complaining and started to be happy that none of them were going home. Now, I figure the school day's over now. Go and change so that you can go home. And Midoriya, I suggest you go and get your finger checked by Recovery Girl, Aizawa concluded as he walked away. Once he left, everyone started to talk and celebrate. Blossom quickly met up with her sisters, both of which looked extremely relieved and happy. I'm so glad that Mr. Aizawa was lying about the expulsion, Bubbles squealed. Buttercup shrugged. Well, it wouldn't matter if it was real or not. We weren't going home either way. I know, Bubbles admitted before looking around, but I didn't want anyone to go home. I like this class and everyone in it. Blossom smiled as she looked around too. Yeah, me too. I gotta say, this experience of going to school is way better than I expected. Just then, a chorus of voices shouted, catching the girls' attention. Hey, Miyako, come over here. Kaoru, come and hang out with us. The girls turned around, seeing a group of girls and another group of guys, with the former calling Bubbles and the latter calling Buttercup. The two looked at Blossom for permission, to which she chuckled at. Go ahead, Blossom said. With that, Bubbles and Buttercup smiled before rushing off to hang out with their new friends. As Blossom stood alone, watching them run with a smile, she then heard Ochako's voice behind her. Momoko. Blossom turned around to see Ochako and Tenya walk over to her, smiling. Quickly, she ran towards them and waved. Hi, you guys did really great on the tests, she exclaimed. Ochako laughed. Aw, you stole my line. I was about to say the same thing to you. I was going to congratulate you as well, Tenya added. I must admit, you and your sisters really are prodigies when it comes to tests like these. Blossom rubbed the back of her head while smiling sheepishly. Thanks. I guess my sisters and I had a lot of practice. As the three laughed, Blossom then noticed Izuku out of the corner of her eye, heading towards the door. Suddenly, something struck her, causing Blossom to start walking away from Ochako and Tenya. Sorry, but I gotta do something. "I'll be right back," she told them. Ochako smiled. "Okay, we'll be waiting." After giving the two a friendly smile, Blossom walked over to Izuku. As she got closer, she called out his name. Izuku?" she asked. Izuku turned around to look at her, a bit startled. "Oh, hey, Momoko, what's up?" he greeted her. Blossom came to a stop and smiled softly. "I just wanted to thank you," she replied. At this, Izuku's eyes widened. "Thank me? For what?" "I guess for a number of things. How you tried to help us when that sludge villain attacked, and how you wished me good luck when I did the tests today. That helped me more than you know, and I'm grateful for it," Blossom answered. Izuku didn't say anything for a second, prompting Blossom to wonder with a fading smile if she had said something wrong. But then, the sudden grin and the bright eyes proved the worries wrong. "Oh, no problem. I guess I need to thank you in return. You and your sisters did stop Kaken from blasting me in the face. Thanks for that," he said happily. After he said that, Blossom thought back to that moment where Bakugou was yelling at Izuku and how he looked unfathomably offended by Izuku's score. At first glance, one could simply conclude that Bakugou was just jealous. But the more that Blossom thought about it, the more meaningful and important the moment seemed, and the more she felt the need to ask Izuku about it. But instead, Blossom decided against it. "It's not my place to ask." Instead, she replied with, "Yeah, no problem. Well, I hope your finger gets better. See you later." With that, Blossom walked away, hearing Izuku shout happily behind her, "You too." As Blossom walked back to Ochako and Tenya, Blossom glanced at Bubbles and Buttercup in the near distance. They looked like they were having a lot of fun as they talked with their classmates. Then, Blossom looked back at her new friends, Ochako and Tenya, who were waving at her with a smile. As she thought about this, along with Izuku, the newest friend she made, Blossom couldn't help but smile. It was clear that this reality, the one that she and her sisters landed in all of those months ago, wasn't the best. But with new friends and a whole new world of exciting opportunities, one thing was for sure. Despite its flaws, this reality wasn't so bad. After their scary yet thrilling orientation, the girls found themselves waking up much earlier the next day, filled with boundless energy. Why? Because if an orientation for a hero school was that exciting, the girls could only imagine how fun their first day of classes would be. Exactly how much fun was the first day of UA going to hold for our heroes? And the answer to that was not so much fun. The lack of fun wasn't because of any of the students in Class 1A getting expelled, as no one got expelled at all after the quirk apprehension test. It wasn't because of Bakugou, who seemed to glare even harder at the girls this time around whenever they would pass by each other. It wasn't even because of Aizawa, who didn't stay that long with them anyways, as he only saw them for homeroom. No, the lack of fun was because of what had to be the most boring thing ever created by mankind, schoolwork. Yes, apparently UA High, despite being the top hero academy in Japan, still functioned like a normal school in some ways to Buttercup's chagrin. Before they could ever get close to hero training again at the end of the school day, the girls had to sit through math, history, science, and language classes. Of course, due to their extensive knowledge from being homeschooled by the professor, the girls had no trouble in keeping up with their classes. And thankfully, the teachers decided to be lenient for the first day and hand out light work. But that still didn't prevent the boredom that set heavily in the girls' bones, causing them to direct their interests to menial things, such as a window view or some crushed pencil lead that could be organized into a small pile. The good news was that the classes went by fast. As science class finally ended and Buttercup was only 5 seconds away from smashing her head into a wall, Bubbles made a realization that cleared the severe case of boredom away as quickly as clouds clearing after a storm. We have Hero Foundational Studies next. Hearing this news made virtually everyone in class want to sigh, not bothering to hide the visual relief on their faces. It's about time. Buttercup huffed as she leaned forward and plopped on her desk. I've been staring at the wall for so long, I actually started to go cross-eyed. Blossom looked at her sister and shook her head. You know, you could have at least been listening to history class. How they talked about the origin of quirks and age of heroes was fascinating, you have to admit. Buttercup shrugged. I've read those stories on the internet so many times that it just became regular old history to me. Before the girls could continue their conversation, the door then bursted open, grabbing everyone's attention. I am here. At that moment, other than the announcement, there was total silence. But of course, the silence didn't last long as the owner of the signature catchphrase, a certain smiling blonde, waltzed in, wearing an extravagant hero costume. Oh my gosh, it's All Might. He really is a teacher here. No way, no way, no waggy. The girls found themselves fangirling over All Might just as much as their classmates as they cheered and squealed. As they did, Bubbles took a moment to ask Blossom a question. All Might's a teacher too? When did that happen? She asked. For a second, Blossom thought about it. Did All Might ever mention that he was working at UA when the girls received their entrance exam results? But that brief period of thought was over in an instant, as Blossom's hero-obsessed fangirl side took over and she shrugged. Don't know, don't care, she said simply before calling to All Might. All Might, I love you. I really want an autograph. As the cheers went on though, All Might silenced them almost immediately after he raised his hand, wearing his signature grin. Yes, my dear students, All Might declared, I am equally excited as you all for this class. Why? Because it's our very first session together. After he said this, everyone clapped, their cheers taking a little longer to quiet down. Now, I suppose this is where I start with the motivational teacher's speech about how this is going to be a fun year of learning and new experiences. But I won't bother to waste your time with that, especially with you all so eager to get out there and blast stuff. So all I gotta say is go on down to the locker rooms, where your newly made hero costumes are waiting, and change. When you're done, meet me outside of the school at ground beta. With that, All Might left the room. A split second passed before a stampede of way too excited classmates pushed their way out of the classroom frantically. The Powerpuff Girls were one of the firsts out the door and rushed down to the girls' locker room. As they filed in with the rest of the class 1 of girls, they found a set of futuristic drawers waiting for them. Each drawer was labeled with a name, with their chosen hero costume waiting inside for them. Quickly, all of the girls scrambled for their hero costume, until everyone held their folded costume in their hands. As Blossom grabbed her costume and looked down at the neat pink shirt on top, she recalled the time when she and her sisters had finally decided on a costume. The day before school orientation. Let's be real. We need to lose the dresses, Buttercup said. It was the day before school orientation, and the hero costume deadline was closer than ever. The girls needed to submit the final designs of their costume by midnight, or else they were going to end up with no hero costumes to wear. And yet they still found themselves constantly making last-minute changes and redesigns to their costume sketches. After hearing Buttercup's words, Bubbles looked distressed. The two had been clashing over the matter of having a dress as a costume. While Bubbles insisted on keeping the classic dresses, Buttercup protested against it, providing a suggestion of another clothes article the costumes could take the form of. I told you, Buttercup. I don't want to wear shorts, I want my nice and silky dress, Bubbles whined. Despite being in an argument, Buttercup looked surprisingly patient. While she wasn't exactly calm, she wasn't going off the rails like she normally does in a dispute. Look, Bubs, I get it. You want to stick to tradition. But you have to understand, we are not 5 anymore. We can't be running around in dresses unless you want more people mistaking us for toddlers instead of heroes. Buttercup sighed. Bubbles pouted. I don't care if people think I'm a baby. I like my dresses and nobody's opinion is gonna change that. Got it? It's not just what people think about it. The dresses have always created some problems. They would get stuck in things easily, and I once saw you get blown away like a piece of paper by a strong wind because of your dress puffing up like a parachute. That wasn't the dress's fault. That wind was out of control. Someone should scold it for that. Bubbles protested. Buttercup groaned. Ugh, just admit it, will you? As cute as they are, and even though those dresses are the only dress I like to wear, they need to go. Blossom, back me up here. As the bickering went on, Blossom had been looking down at the costume template, sketching the costume, and when Buttercup whined to her, Blossom looked up with a neutral expression. No need. I have already finished a design that will please both of you. Buttercup gaped. Oh, come on, Why do you always gotta butt in with your ideas? Blossom cut Buttercup short as she showed her the design. After looking at it for a few seconds, Buttercup grabbed the paper and brought it closer, looking hard at it. Bubbles pressed against Buttercup's side, looking at the paper too. After looking at it for a few more seconds, Bubbles and Buttercup looked up with wide and sparkling eyes. "This is perfect," they shouted in unison. Blossom tossed some hair behind her shoulder and smiled smugly. "I know it is." Present day. At the entrance of Ground Beta, Class 1A walked out into the sunlight to proudly show off their new costumes. Fabrics, accessories, and colors of all kinds composed diverse and impressive outfits. And while the girls admired their classmates' fashion senses, they believed that theirs was the most impressive of all. The girls' new look slightly mirrored their old one. They wore a sleeveless, black striped shirt that corresponded with their signature color. Blossom is pink, Bubbles is blue, and Buttercup is green. They also styled their hair like they always did. Blossom with her red bow, Bubbles with her pigtails, and Buttercup with her messy bob. But the similarities ended there. Instead of a dress, they were wearing what had to be Buttercup's dream clothes article, shorts. With the openings rimmed with white, the shorts, which also matched the girls' corresponding color, were just as airy and light as a skirt, accompanied with a black belt to secure the loose-fitting shorts to the girls' waists. Over their shirt, they also wore a sleeveless jersey jacket, light pink for Blossom, light blue for Bubbles, and yellow for Buttercup with a monogrammed P on it. They also wore colored boots that came up to the top of their ankles, edged with white like their shorts. 2 new accessories were added. Gloves, specifically black and fingerless ones, were worn over their hands. The second one was a black choker that circled the girl's neck. From it hung a single charm that differed among each girl. Blossom had a pink heart, Bubbles had a blue diamond, and Buttercup had a green star. While the gloves were meant to help the girls with their power, absorbing the shockwaves felt when punching something with super strength, the choker was simply there for fashion. In conclusion, even with the major outfit change, the girls were absolutely in love with their costumes. "Bubbles, stop twirling or else you'll get dizzy," Blossom fussed. Bubbles, who was jumping from foot to foot and spinning like a ballerina, still continued as she replied, "I can't. I just feel so light on my feet. And these shorts, OMG. They don't even feel like shorts. It's like I'm wearing my dress again," she giggled. Buttercup smirked. "Told you the shorts were a good idea." Bubbles finally stopped spinning as she started to get a little dizzy, like Blossom said. But she barely minded it as she swooned. "Ooh, I wish Taco was here to see me. Think you could make a costume design for him too?" Blossom rolled her eyes. "Not unless he suddenly comes to life and decides to be a US student." Buttercup, meanwhile, was in the middle of stretching, grinning from ear to ear. "Man, I feel pumped. I feel like I can take on the world. In fact, where's an arena trap so that I can kick its face in?" Blossom crossed her arms, yet smiled. "Normally I'd dismiss your excitement to fight as cockiness, but I gotta say, I'm excited too. We can finally show our class how the Powerpuffs roll." Just then, Allmight spoke, drawing the class's admiring attention once again. "Look at this class. Oh, I just love your hero costumes. As you can see, your costume is an important thing that makes you stand out from all of the other heroes, something that is really encouraged to wear when doing hero work. But let me not waste the class away by talking about hero costumes. We have an exercise to complete, so follow me if you please." After that, Class 1A followed Allmight to a nearby building that loomed over them, casting a semi-dark shadow over the sun. As he stopped next to a red bucket on a high stool, Allmight spoke again. "See this building over here? This is one of many sites of your first hero training exercise. For simplicity, I'll name it a battle trial. Now, before we go over the rules, there are a few things you must know about being a hero. Every day on the job, heroes encounter many situations that involve not just strength, but quick wits and strategizing. That is especially true when heroes have the job of infiltrating a villain's hideout to confiscate a stolen payload. In this kind of situation, the hero must be vigilant and calculating, as well as adaptive and cunning. With that being said, here are the rules. Everyone will draw lots and will randomly be placed in groups of 2. The team of 2 is then paired with another team, and each team will get a role to play. One team is the heroes, and the other team is the villains. Your role determines what you must do to win. For villains, they must either protect their payload for the time allotted, or capture the heroes in a rope that I will provide. For heroes, they must either locate and retrieve the payload by simply touching it, or capture the villains in said rope. Whoever completes a task before or when time runs out is the winner. That's all there is to it, really? Questions? Immediately after the question left All Might's mouth, Ida raised his hand stiffly into the air. Yes, Ida. I was wondering, All Might, are we to go through the battle trial with no quirk usage? He asked. All Might scoffed and winked playfully. Why, of course not. The absolute best thing about hero training is that it's the only part of the day where you can use quirks. That's why people look forward to it. Anything else? Blossom found herself raising her hand, as one thing confused her. Ah, yes, Momoko. What is your question? Well, Blossom said, a little nervous, it's not really a question. You explained that there were going to be groups of 2. But there are 23 students, including me, in this class. That can't be divided into groups of 2 without having one person left over. All Might brighten. Oh, you just reminded me. There will be groups of 2. However, there will be one group of 3. Only one. Oh, but with that group of 3, wouldn't it be unfair if the group was to be pitted against another team, as it's fully possible for that group of 3 to go up against a 2-person team? Yes, it would. But don't you worry. I have come up with a solution to that. I'll explain it when the time comes. Okay, any more questions? When no one raised their hands, All Might clapped his hands together. Good. Now, as you can see, this bucket right next to me on the stool contains slips of paper that will determine who goes with who. Grab one and find out who your partner is. Quickly, everyone ran to the bucket, plucking out a slip of paper with their name on it. On the back was their partner name and battle trial roll. When Blossom picked hers, she realized her slip was a little longer than the others. When she turned it to the back, she saw that she was paired with Bubbles and Buttercup, and that her group was the heroes. I guess we're the group of 3, she said to her sisters, who were looking at their slips. Ha, that was a mistake. We're unstoppable together. I feel sorry for the poor chumps that are about to get their asses kicked. Buttercup boasted. I wonder who we're fighting, Bubbles asked. Well, I'm 99% sure that it's not going to be anybody from our class, Blossom answered. Wait, what if we fight All Might? That'd be epic, Buttercup gasped. Ah, yes, I bet our teacher will definitely pit himself against 3 12-year-old girls, Blossom said sarcastically. Before the girls could talk more, All Might was now telling more instructions to the class once everyone got a paper slip. Now, there are a few things I'd like to point out before we get on with it. There are 3 test sites for the battle trial. If one building was to get a bit messy from a battle, the next battle will be simply relocated to a different building. The same will happen if that building gets wrecked, and so on. While the rest of the class is out of battle, they will be in the UA monitoring room with me and speculate the battles. But don't take the speculation as relaxation time. It's important to take notes on strategies and methods used by your classmates in BAT to help you with your own strategies and methods. You will also have to constructively critique the current participants on their areas of improvement after the battle is done. Everyone got that? As Class 1 nodded and voiced their understanding, All Might's grin seemed to double in size. Alright, let's get some battles underway. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author PeriwinkleFrog on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.